Yes, you're right.
No, go ahead. You were going to say something. I
I
think.
wasn't really. I actually, if we could get back to, probably I keep interrupting you, just to you talking historically, probably the easiest way of doing it is back to late '71 when Clive Bunker did leave the band, and that really left you as the only surviving member of the original Jethro Tull, although, as you say, the various people from the John Evans band came in. So, picking back up late '71 through '72, a lot of extensive touring, particularly in the States.
Well, as far as America was concerned, Jethro Tull was in its earliest edition. Never had Mick Abrahams in it because they didn't really know the first album terribly well, and Martin Barr, as far as our American audience is concerned, has always been in the group, as have I. And Clive Bunker and Glenn Cornick sort of went soon after that, so I should think Barry Barlow as the Jethro Tull drummer is better known than anybody else. And John Evans as a keyboard player is better known than anybody else, since he came in also in '69 on a kind of almost like a session man playing on the album Benefit, but in late '69 I think he sort of became a member of the group and toured with us. I mean, really, as far as America's concerned, I think the band would have appeared fairly stable up until relatively recently. It was more the addition of figures and only the change in bass players that would have been seen to have been any sort of disruptive element in the band's continuity. But up until the band always felt more unstable, in fact, around that '71, '72 period than it has done since, because there was a lot of general sort of rather uncomfortable feeling about touring and the number of dates we were playing and the I suppose haphazardness of it all, since in those days touring bands were inclined to sort of arrive at an airport with their amplifiers not even in cases and expect to check them on airplanes as excess baggage, which we did. Of course, it's so different now, and we had to be one of the bands who, if anything, pioneered the modern touring methods as far as all of the shipping of huge amounts of equipment and stages and lights and people, and we got thoroughly involved in that in '72 really. So that whole evolution of the touring entity is something that we were right in at the beginning of, and finding our way in, before a lot of other bands did, I should think. Because we were very active at that point in doing proper full-scale tours, not just in the US, but throughout Europe as well. And we learnt it the hard way. It used to cost us a lot of money through being careful and cautious. We managed to make tours profitable, whereas a lot of bands didn't and still don't. I mean, I note with interest because we were asked to rush out to do a sudden German television show this week in a couple of days' time, having just paid off all our crew and trucks and everything from this recent European tour, and managed to collar all the crew before they got on to doing anything else, but couldn't get a truck. Reason being, the Stones have got 30, 40-foot trailers on the road, which is fine, for someone who enjoys playing with those kind of logistics, but are 30, 40-foot trailers really necessary to do the Stones outdoor dates? I wouldn't have thought so.
Figures of Brit came out in 1972. You said it was a concept album, the first concept album for Jethro Tull.
Yes, it was a concept album as much as it did begin life before we got into the studio, and there was a fairly complete amount of music before we went into the studio. The arrangements and the finishing touches to the music were as a result of contributions by all the members of the band, not just me. And I think it was very much a band album, although maybe it comes across as being, very, I suppose actually because of that it comes across as being very complex and a bit sort of strange lyrically and musically, but it was very much a band record, as indeed was Passion Play, which followed. It was another sort of band all very much involved in the arrangement of the music. But I think in itself that approach is a bit of a cul-de-sac in terms of rock music, because it wasn't really sufficiently... I mean, it was a bit naive musically in some ways, and if I was going to do that kind of music today, I think I would spend a lot more time than the 3 or 4 weeks it took to do Thick as a Brick. So...
In 1973, as you say, you recorded and released Passion Play. Now that continued the concept idea, and the album received virtually a unanimous thumbs down from the press in this country. 1972-73 seemed particularly bad years for Jethro Tull and you, Ian, because you were getting a tremendous amount of negative response from the UK press in particular, very hostile.
Well, no, our negative UK press started in 1969 with Benefit, when a lot of people began to, visibly go off the group that they'd helped to make popular in the first place. 72 and Thick as a Brick there wasn't a particular evidence of any more or less adverse criticism. We had our usual mixed reviews. Passion Play got mixed reviews, but it got 1 or 2 widely circulated very bad reviews, most noticeably from Chris Welch and Melody Maker, and I think some chap on the New York Times or something, some clot, who basically, went down in my books as a bad reviewer, because rather like Chris Welch, there was no attempt made to understand, the evolution of Passion Play from Thick as a Brick, or really what it was going towards. It was a very personal reaction and a bit vitriolic, because a reviewer who has followed a band and maybe liked them and then finds he's got a record that he really can't get to grips with, or actually just personally doesn't like, feels, I suppose, in some way betrayed, that he's a band that he was really into suddenly delivers something he doesn't like, and he gets a bit sort of over the top about it. And it was just a rather personal attack, which I thought was a bit unnecessary from Chris Welch, who, at the time we sort of felt we knew quite well. No way you're going to like everything that anybody writes or plays. There's going to be some stuff that you just don't rate at all. But Chris Welch's attitude was that it was actually bad music, and I use those words with quotes around them. He did actually say that it was bad music. Well, it wasn't bad. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. Certainly, musically, it was in no way inferior, I think, to Thick as a Brick. It was a difficult album for people to listen to if you were looking for instant entertainment.